The morning sun poured over the cul-de-sac like liquid gold, and for once the world felt peaceful. The kind of peace you could only find in the suburbs. Birds chirping, sprinklers hissing, the distant hum of lawnmowers. I rolled up the garage door slowly, revealing my pride and joy. A 1967 Ford Mustang fastback, deep sapphire blue, shining like it had just been dipped in glass. The chrome glimmered. The polished hood reflected my face back at me, tired, proud, and happy. For a second, I wasn't Special Agent Ryan Keller. I was just a man in his 40s, home from the chaos of federal investigations, enjoying the simple things again. This car wasn't just metal and paint. It was a piece of my late father's soul. He'd restored it back when I was a kid. Every bolt, every inch of leather smelled like home. I'd inherited it after he passed, and even though my job took me across the country chasing criminals, this car stayed here, waiting. But peace is a luxury, especially when you live next to Karen. Her real name was Melissa Grayson, but no one in the neighborhood called her that. She was the self-appointed sheriff of our HOA, armed with a clipboard, a whistle, and enough misplaced authority to run a small dictatorship. She loved rules more than kindness. If your grass grew half an inch too tall, expect a letter. If you left your trash bins out for 10 minutes too long, you'd hear a knock. The first time she saw my Mustang, she nearly choked on her morning coffee. I was wiping down the hood when I heard her heels clacking across her driveway. "You know, that car doesn't exactly fit the neighborhood aesthetic," she said, her tone dripping with polite hostility. I looked up, offering a half smile. "Morning to you too, Karen." "It's Melissa," she snapped. "And for your information, the HOA has rules about leaving old vehicles out front. It brings down property value." I stared at her SUV, a dull beige crossover with one missing hubcap. "Ma'am," I said, calm as ever, "this car is worth more than your house." Her jaw dropped. "Excuse me?" I shrugged, grabbing my microfiber towel again. "It's a 67 fastback, original engine, vintage registration. It's not a junker, it's history." She crossed her arms. "History belongs in a museum, not in a driveway. If you won't move it, I'll have to report you." "Go ahead," I said, not looking up, "but make sure you file it under unfounded complaint." From that day on, Karen made it her mission to make my life difficult. She'd circle the street twice a day pretending to walk her Pomeranian, but clearly checking if my car was still there. I caught her taking pictures once, clipboard in hand, muttering about HOA standards. I could have shut her down right away. I'd done background checks on senators and CEOs before. It would have taken me 10 minutes to pull up her file. But I wanted to see how far she'd go. People like her always expose themselves when given enough rope. It didn't take long. One Friday morning, I stepped out to find a bright yellow slip taped to my mailbox. "Notice of violation. Unsightly vehicle." Underneath, in neat cursive, it read, "You have 72 hours to remove this car from your property, or the HOA will take further action." I couldn't help but laugh. I had further action ready too, just not the kind she was expecting. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the notice, date-stamped it, and filed it away. Old habits die hard. In my line of work, documentation was everything. That evening, I worked on the car again. The smell of engine oil and fresh wax filled the air. A couple of neighborhood kids stopped by, curious. "Cool car, mister," one said, wide-eyed. "Thanks," I smiled, tossing him a rag. "Want to help me polish the rims?" They laughed, and for a moment it felt good. Normal. But the peace shattered when I heard her voice again. "Are you seriously letting children touch that?" Karen barked, marching over like she owned the street. "They're fine," I said without turning. "It's dangerous. What if they scratch it? And what's with that smell? It's disturbing the neighborhood." I stood up slowly, wiping my hands. "You know what's really disturbing, Karen? Someone who thinks they can control everyone else's property." She gasped. "Excuse me?" "Let me save you some paperwork," I continued. "This car is fully registered, federally insured, and legally protected as a vintage collectible. You touch it, you're breaking the law." Her eyes narrowed. You think you're special just because you own a fancy car? No, I said. I think I'm lucky I don't have to live my life spying on neighbors. She stormed off, muttering something about disrespectful men. As her heels clacked away, I looked at the Mustang again. The sunlight hit the hood just right. It gleamed like armor. I had no idea how right that image would become. Because that car, my father's legacy, was about to become a battlefield. And Karen? She was about to learn what happens when you pick a fight with the wrong person. The days that followed felt like an uneasy calm before the storm. Karen's grip on her petty HOA rules grew tighter, but I remained steadfast. I knew she was itching for a reason to escalate her fight, but I wasn't worried. I'd kept my distance, documented every violation notice, and had patiently waited for the right time. But one night, I came home late after a business trip, a little tired from the long day but looking forward to unwinding in my quiet home. The Mustang was exactly where I'd left it, under the garage lights, safe in my driveway. That's when I noticed it. At first, it was subtle, a glint of something off in the distance. But as I walked closer, the creeping sense of dread began to rise in my chest. The faint metallic smell of fresh paint hit my nostrils, and my heart skipped a beat. I'd left my Mustang spotless that morning, but now there were new, deep scratches on the passenger side. Scratches that had been carved through the beautiful paint, gouging deep enough to reach the metal beneath. They weren't random. They were deliberate, jagged, and aggressive. As I stood there trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I found the words "junk" spray-painted in red across the driver's door. A sinking feeling hit me. I immediately knew who was behind it. There was no one else who could have been that cruel, that spiteful. No one else who would go out of their way to damage someone's property for something as petty as the presence of a vintage car. My father's Mustang, my legacy, the car that had taken him years to restore. And now it was a target for someone's twisted sense of control. I was furious, fueled by a mix of anger, betrayal, and disbelief, but I didn't panic. I'd spent years dealing with complex cases, and this was no different. I knew what I had to do. I immediately snapped photos of the damage, the scratches, the spray paint. I made sure to document the time and date, making sure there was no question about when it happened. My next step was clear. I needed to gather more evidence, and I needed to do it quietly. I went inside and called my contact, Agent Collins from the FBI's Property Crimes Division. We'd worked together on several cases in the past, and I knew he owed me a favor. "You need to get over here. I've got an issue," I said, my voice barely controlling the rage. "Problem?" Collins asked. He could hear the anger in my tone. "What's going on?" "My car's been vandalized," I explained. "I've got footage of Karen, of her spying on me, so I know this is no coincidence." I could almost hear him nodding. "I'll send a couple of guys to check it out. You might want to keep things quiet for now. Let's handle this properly." It was a good thing I had cameras installed around the house. I had set them up during my first week here, an old habit from my work in law enforcement. What I hadn't expected was how useful they'd become in gathering evidence for this petty war with Karen. I reviewed the footage. There she was at 2:17 a.m. on camera. Karen in her pink robe walking across my yard. She was sneaky, trying to stay hidden in the shadows. I could hear the faint click of the spray paint can opening as she approached the Mustang. She was carefully aiming the nozzle and started marking up the side of the car, scratching deep into the paint, clearly enjoying it. I could feel my blood boil watching her deliberately ruin something I cherished. She wasn't just damaging a car, she was attacking my memory of my father. I couldn't let her get away with it. But I didn't rush out immediately to confront her. I wasn't going to fall into her trap. I knew Karen well enough to recognize her need for drama. She was baiting me into a confrontation so she could call the cops, cry victim, and act like she was the one being harassed. So I played it cool. I called Collins and set up a time for him to visit. But first, I needed to clean the mess up, at least enough for the insurance report. I grabbed my supplies and started scrubbing the door, trying to remove the paint without causing further damage. The whole time, I couldn't shake the image of Karen's smug face when she'd first seen my car. 2 hours later, Collins and his team showed up with a few more agents. They took one look at the footage, then at the vandalized Mustang. Collins shook his head. "This is textbook vandalism, Ryan. This isn't just petty, this is personal." I nodded, still trying to suppress the fury. "Yeah, I know, and she'll pay for it. She's been targeting me from the start ever since I got here." Collins pulled out his phone, dialing something. "I'm getting the local PD to start an official report. We'll handle this." We walked around the car, inspecting the damage and taking photos. The police arrived shortly after, looking serious. They reviewed everything, my footage, the damage, the reports, but they didn't need much more. Karen had made a mistake, and she was about to learn the hard way what happens when you mess with the wrong person. "I'm pressing charges," I told them. "This isn't just vandalism, it's a federal offense. She's going to regret this." I stood there for a moment watching as the officers started their investigation. This wasn't just about the Mustang anymore. This was about showing Karen and anyone else in this neighborhood that I wasn't the kind of person who just let things slide. They had no idea what they'd just triggered. The days after the vandalism were filled with a quiet tension. The police had taken the footage, filed the reports, and sent it off for further investigation. But I knew Karen wasn't going to back down easily. In fact, she probably thought she was untouchable. After all, she had run the HOA with an iron fist for years, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. I spent the next few days preparing my case. I knew she would come at me with some ridiculous defense, trying to spin the story in her favor. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of catching me off guard. I printed the footage, the police report, and every email I had exchanged with the HOA. I had everything documented, everything in order. I wasn't just going to fight her vandalism, I was going to make her wish she'd never crossed me. The moment I'd been waiting for arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was out in the yard, taking a break from work, when I saw her walking down the street, clipboard in hand, and that smirk plastered across her face. She was striding toward my house, determined and ready for battle. I didn't wait for her to come to me. I walked straight to the front gate, meeting her halfway. Karen stopped when she saw me, her expression changing from confident to defensive in an instant. "What do you want, Karen?" I asked, my tone flat but firm. "You know exactly what this is about," she said, holding up her clipboard like a shield. "Your car is a nuisance, and now it's damaged, by you no less. It's time you fixed this problem." I raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play innocent," she snapped. "You ruined the car. I'm going to make sure the HOA takes action. You've broken the rules by allowing that eyesore to sit in your driveway." "You're talking about the car you vandalized?" I asked, keeping my tone level. "The one you scratched and spray painted?" She froze, eyes darting to the ground, then back up at me. "That's not what happened," she said quickly, trying to backpedal. "I don't know what you're implying, but "Don't lie to me, Karen," I said, cutting her off. "I've got it all on camera. You walked across my yard in the dead of night with spray paint in hand, damaging my car. Your car is the one that needs to be towed, not mine." Her face turned crimson. "You have no right to accuse me of anything," she shouted, her voice rising with each word. "You think just because you have a fancy job and some connections, you can do whatever you want? I'm calling the cops on you for harassment." "You already called the cops on me, Karen," I replied, keeping my calm. "And now the evidence is in my favor. You damaged federal property. That's not harassment, that's a crime." She recoiled slightly, the realization setting in that she wasn't going to talk her way out of this. Her whole demeanor shifted, but it wasn't the shift of someone defeated. It was the shift of someone panicking, trying to regain control. She clutched the clipboard tighter, her knuckles white, but it was clear she had no idea how to handle this situation now. "You can't just go around making threats like this," she said, her voice suddenly quieter. "The HOA will never allow this." "The HOA can't help you now," I said. "You've crossed a line. I'm pressing charges." I'm not going to stand here and let you make me out to be a criminal," she yelled, now visibly trembling with rage. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." I stood my ground, watching her carefully, knowing she was too proud and too stubborn to admit defeat. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was simply holding her accountable for her actions. But Karen was done pretending she was in charge, and that made her dangerous. "I'll see you in court," she muttered, spinning on her heel and stomping back to her house. "You'll be sorry you messed with me." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. As I watched her disappear into her house, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. She was right about one thing. This wasn't over, but for once she wouldn't be the one calling the shots. The following days were filled with the aftermath of that confrontation. Karen avoided me like the plague, but the gossip started to spread. Neighbors whispered behind their curtains whenever I walked by, and I could hear the faintest chuckles as I worked on the Mustang in the garage. People in the neighborhood were finally seeing Karen for what she was, a bully who had crossed the line one too many times. I didn't have time to enjoy it, though. I had bigger plans. My lawyer was drafting up a civil lawsuit, and Collins had already contacted the local police. They'd sent over an officer to officially document the damages to the car, and I was preparing to press charges. But even though Karen was on the defensive, I knew she wasn't going to go down quietly. She had one last card to play, and she was going to play it soon. I knew the next move would be crucial. Would Karen finally back off, realizing she'd made the biggest mistake of her life? Or would she escalate it even further, trying to drag me into a legal mess I didn't want to be part of? The suspense was killing me, but I was ready. Karen had no idea what she was up against. It was an oddly calm morning, the kind that feels peaceful but hides a storm on the horizon. I was sipping coffee in my garage, looking at my half-polished Mustang, when my phone buzzed. It was Collins, the officer I'd spoken to earlier. "Morning, Alex," he said over the line. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. We're heading to your neighborhood today. Got the warrant approved." I paused mid-sip. "For Karen?" "Yup, vandalism, trespassing, and destruction of property," he said. "But that's not all. When we ran her record, turns out she's been harassing other residents too. You weren't her first target. You were just the first who fought back." I leaned back in my chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. "Copy that, officer. I'll be here." As I hung up, I couldn't help but glance at Karen's house across the street. The blinds twitched. She was always watching, always nosy. She had no idea her reign of terror was about to come crashing down. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing. 2 patrol cars rolled into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing silently. People peeked through their curtains and fences, phones ready to record. Karen stepped out of her front door, still wearing that smug confidence she always carried, clipboard in hand like it was a weapon. When she saw the cops approach her driveway, she plastered on her sweetest fake smile. "Oh, officers," she called out, pretending to be surprised. "If you're here about my neighbor, I've been expecting you." "Actually, ma'am," Collins said, stepping forward, "we're here for you." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "We have a warrant for your arrest," he said flatly. "Criminal mischief, vandalism of private property, and trespassing." For the first time since I'd met her, Karen's face went pale. What are you talking about? This must be a mistake." "It's not a mistake," I said, walking out from my garage, holding up the tablet with the security footage paused on her face mid-spray paint. "This is you, Karen, at 2:17 a.m. crossing my property and vandalizing my car." Her jaw dropped. You can't use that. That's illegal. I didn't give permission for you to film me." I almost laughed. "You were on my property committing a crime. I don't need your permission for that." The neighbors had started gathering now, whispering among themselves, recording on their phones. You could feel the energy shift. The same people who once avoided getting involved were now openly enjoying the spectacle. Karen's empire of fear was crumbling in real time. Collins handed her the papers. "Ma'am, please place your hands where I can see them." But Karen wasn't going quietly. She took a step back, shaking her head violently. "No, you don't understand. He's lying. He's trying to frame me. I run this neighborhood." "That's exactly the problem," I muttered. She turned toward me, wild-eyed. "You? You're the reason this is happening. You've been after me since you moved in. I crossed my arms. You vandalized my car, broke the law, and lied about it. The only person who caused this is you, Karen. Before she could argue again, the second officer gently but firmly turned her around and placed handcuffs on her wrists. The clink of metal echoed down the street, a sound every neighbor would remember. As they guided her toward the squad car, she shouted over her shoulder, "This isn't over. You'll regret this. You don't know who you're dealing with." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I think I do." She glared at me, confusion flickering in her eyes. That's when I decided to end this once and for all. "You see, Karen," I said calmly, walking closer, "you didn't just vandalize an old car. You vandalized a federal restoration project. That Mustang was part of a heritage investigation, tied to a past government case, which makes your little spray paint session a federal offense." Her mouth fell open. What? You're joking." "I wish I was," I replied, showing her my badge. "Special Agent Alexander Hayes, U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation. You should have done your homework before picking your next victim." The crowd gasped. The officer next to her gave me a knowing smirk as Karen's knees nearly gave out. You can't do this to me," she stammered weakly. "I'm not doing anything," I said simply. "The law is." The cops loaded her into the back of the cruiser as she continued yelling, but her words no longer carried any power. The moment the doors shut, silence fell across the neighborhood, the kind of silence that comes after a storm finally breaks. Collins turned to me. "Well," he said, "I'd say that's one less HOA problem to deal with." "Let's hope it stays that way," I said, chuckling. He nodded toward the garage. "That car's going to shine again soon. Make sure to invite me to the first test drive." "You got it," I said, shaking his hand. As the cruisers drove off, I turned to see my neighbors stepping out from behind their doors. Some waved, others gave me a thumbs up. For the first time since moving here, they weren't afraid. The HOA's grip was broken. Later that night, I stood in the garage, the Mustang's hood open, the silver paint glinting under the light. The damage was repairable. It would take time, but it would look even better when finished. A symbol of standing up to the kind of people who think they can walk over everyone. Karen's reign was over, and I wasn't just free from her harassment. I'd restored more than a car. I'd restored peace to the neighborhood. As I picked up my wrench, I couldn't help but smirk. "Guess she learned the hard way," I murmured to myself. "Some rules even Karens can't bend."